My name is Reagan, and I'm here today to tell you my story. What exactly am I? This is what you will find for yourself after hearing my entire narrative. Have you ever had the feeling that someone is always monitoring you? Someone was observing your every action and your inner feelings were being monitored. I've been there, and I can still feel it. It may appear eerie to some of you, and it is. What occurred to me nearly ended my life. I was a regular girl, an only child. My father used to work in a garage, while my mother worked in a bank. We never spent that much time together, it's true. Nonetheless, our family was really tight. I was in my senior year of high school. Expectations were high for me since, despite being a bright, energetic, and playful girl, I usually attended my classes and was a ballerina who performed in the city theater. Mom and Dad have always wanted me to be a successful girl, both socially and academically, because I am an only child. At first glance, appearances can be deceiving. Perhaps you couldn't believe what was inside of me because of the way I appeared, my secure, happy life, and my promising future. I worked hard to create a plausible shell in which to hide, and I was able to conceal the reality that I was completely miserable, completely insecure, and always terrified. Almost everything frightened me. I was afraid of what others could think of me, of what my family might think of me, of failure, and even of the future. What if I couldn't stay on track with my life? What if I don't succeed? What if I wasn't all that unique? Everyone looked up to this successful and playful girl. Have you ever been in my position? Do you realize how difficult that may be? From the outside, my life appeared to be so flawless that I was able to fool not only the people around me, but even myself, making it nearly impossible for me to predict what was about to happen. One day, the girls in my ballet team and I heard about a contest in town, and the best dancer would earn a ticket to the world's largest ballet performance, which happens every 5 years. I told myself that I had to win that competition and get the ticket. Even though I'd been practicing my routine day and night, and it wasn't my first time performing in front of an audience, I was afraid on the day of the competition, almost as if I'd have a panic attack. I was humming my favorite song and clapping on my leg, nervously waiting for them to call my name onto the stage. But it was nothing out of the norm. I'd been on stage hundreds of times before. It wasn't long before I heard a distant voice say, "She'll start her routine now." She is looking at the crowd with a pretty neat expression. When I turned around to see where the voice was coming from, there were dozens of other dancers standing behind me. I reasoned that it could be any of them. It's not a huge deal. I'm not going to let anything distract me now. When they called my name, I walked up to the stage. I vividly recall seeing nothing but the judges' faces glaring at me. I was determined to win. I had no choice. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Music began to play, and then I heard the same sound again. This time it said, "She's starting her regimen right now." She is staring out at the audience. She is terrified as she looks at the judges. She will tumble. I stopped dancing, and much to everyone's surprise, began to glance around me in an unsuccessful attempt to locate the source of the voice. Who was speaking? But it was all for naught. "Shut up!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. Then I heard the voice again, saying, "She will flee that location today and never look back." That's exactly what I did. I had no idea what had transpired back there. I dashed home as quickly as I could. I'd completely wrecked everything. I was such a miserable loser. There was no trace of the voice on my walk home. It has simply vanished. What was the situation? It was the first time I'd heard that voice. My entire body was trembling violently. My mind was racing with 1,000 ideas. I had no idea what was wrong with me, and I didn't want to find out. It didn't make a difference. What mattered was that everything was back to normal, right? I arrived at my house, and the voice resurfaced. It began to follow me everywhere I went. She is about to open the door. She dashes to her room. She's closing the door. I had no idea what it was or what was going on around me. The voice was following me, and that was only the beginning. It's reasonable to say that the voice entered my life on that day. I hid in my bed, telling myself, "It's not real. It is not true." Until the voice eventually quieted down and I could catch my breath. When my family was there at supper, I waited for the proper moment and asked, "Mom, Dad, what does hearing voices in your head mean?" My father immediately reacted, "It means you're insane." Then he burst out laughing. My mother was enraged at him for not taking my question seriously. Then she asked me, Why are you asking? Year? Nothing. It's only a schoolgirl. Nothing significant, I responded. Despite this, I felt an urgent need to figure out what was wrong with me. I didn't want to be the weirdo who hears voices in her brain. Anyway, it was no longer there, so I reasoned the next day. However, the voice reappeared during the awful math class, but it was even more powerful this time. It requested that I pour water from my bottle over my teacher's head. Maybe I'd always wanted to do this, but I was very sure no one would enjoy it but myself. Last but not least, the teacher. I did everything I could to ignore the voice, and it worked. For the time being, the voice has vanished, but it returned with a vengeance, and things remained that way for days, then weeks. The voice described everything I did in the third person. She went to school in a pink outfit. She completed her homework. She and her buddies vandalized the school signs. She did this and that. My life had devolved into a living nightmare. Even though I didn't like the voice, I grew accustomed to it. However, it sounded neutral and did not want to manipulate me as I had assumed. All it did was stay by my side and recount everything I did throughout the day. It was even present when I went to bed. Despite the fact that I sounded sharper and more melancholy when I was furious or unhappy, I was certain that I was not insane. I knew it would only be there for a short time before disappearing. There would be no harm caused. However, I was gravely mistaken, as it would remain my secret until its disappearance, with no one being aware of it. I couldn't have been more mistaken. A man named Gavin invited me on a date exactly a month before my prom. He was a member of the football team. He was fit and attractive. To be honest, I had a long-standing crush on him. His invitation meant everything to me. We went out to supper that night, and everything seemed to go swimmingly. It felt like a scene from a fairy tale. Everything was extraordinary. The candles, the food, and most importantly, him. I almost couldn't believe it was true. Even the tone of voice. That day was unusually calm. And just when I thought things couldn't get much better, he texted me when I got home, saying, "I want to take you to the prom." I didn't even have to think about what to answer. I just said, "I'd love that. We're going to have a great time." You would suppose I slept like a baby that night with a big smile on my face. Unfortunately, the exact reverse occurred. The voices tranquilly began to wane. That night, the voice kept shrieking at me, expressing displeasure with my decision to attend the prom with Gavin. Is the voice a mirror of my repressed feelings for Gavin? I was overjoyed because of Gavin's invitation, but I also knew it hadn't even been a week since he'd split up with his cheerleading girlfriend, and they'd be back together in a matter of days. That was their specialty. They'd always been that way. But I ignored my gut instinct and began ranting at the voice, which of course roared back at me. There was no doubt that I had officially lost my mind. The next day, I went to school fatigued and irritated, and my voice, as usual, followed suit. It sounded as desperate and depressing as I felt that day. The prom was approaching, and I was looking more and more dejected and depressed with each passing day. Every time the voice talked to me, I just heard gloomy phrases. It brought back all of my childhood anxieties. The voice was becoming increasingly unpleasant. I walked to the school toilet and exclaimed, "Get out of my head. I can't stand listening to you any longer." But the speaker simply replied quietly, "Now she's yelling at no one. The other girls in the bathroom will now think she's insane." I froze when I heard the last few words. I remembered my father's laughter when he informed me that anyone who hears phantom voices is demented. I thought that when I emerged from the restroom, there would be a large crowd waiting for me, and they would simply stare at me and murmur to each other that I was insane. And other girls had heard me scream, just as the voice had said. They gave me a strange look. I couldn't take it anymore and ran as fast as I could. It was just 2 weeks before the conclusion of the school year when prom finally arrived. I continued to attempt to ignore the voice. There had been no change. I dressed in a crimson gown, wore my hair up, and donned a silver tiara. I waited for Gavin to come and take me to the prom, and I didn't hear even a whisper from the voice. The stillness persisted until I arrived at the gathering. I used to dance with Gavin, the voice added, and now she's dancing with him, unknowing that he's winking at his ex-girlfriend. That was what I was most concerned about. Gavin was still thinking about his ex-girlfriend, and I was afraid. I shoved Gavin away from everyone and shouted at him, "Just go be with her if you still love her. Don't use me solely to make her envious." My appearance took everyone aback. I yelled at Gavin again as he attempted to speak. "You must not deceive me. I know you're still madly in love with her." The voice in my head revealed everything to me. "Everyone warned me that you were a weirdo, but I never believed you were so insane." He then turned away, leaving me alone. Everyone was now aware of the voice in my head. Oh no, what had I gotten myself into? Had I just divulged my own personal secret? Quinn, my best friend, called the next day. She was in a state of panic. Normal people do not hear voices in their heads. She advised you to see a psychiatrist right away. I expected it to be a step in the right direction, but it turned out to be far worse than I could have anticipated. At first, I went to the school counselor with Quinn, and I began to talk to him about my sorrow and sadness, as well as how my family expected nothing less than greatness from me. But when I mentioned the voice in my brain, he stood up in his chair, looked at me seriously, and remarked, "This does not sound good at all." I had a ballet class to attend, so I told him I needed to leave. So he noted in his memo, "Here are sounds in her head that are nothing more than hallucinations." She also imagines herself as a ballerina. My parents were called by the school counselor, who recounted the entire issue to them. When I returned home, they were staring at me with horror in their eyes. Mom hugged me and burst out crying. For the first time in my life, I saw that my father's face was solemn. Mom told me everything the counselor had said. She also stated that he advised me to see a psychiatrist for a diagnosis of my case, as the voice in my head was not a good omen. It could be an indicator of a mental illness. I refused to believe that. I couldn't be insane. I had always expected a few ups and downs in my life, but nothing as horrible as that. I was literally going insane. After hours and hours of inquiries and recounting every detail of my past to the psychiatrist, I braced myself for the horrific diagnosis that was about to be delivered. I was expecting to hear that I had gone insane, but what the doctor told me was completely unexpected. He assured me that I was not hallucinating those voices. Although there was no one stalking me and attempting to ruin my life, the voice in my brain was quite genuine. Doctors diagnosed me with schizophrenia, revealing that the voices I heard mirrored my inner thoughts and feelings, which I had always tried to conceal. Fear, worry, and constantly expecting the worst. When I was in a good mood, my mind had me listening to quiet sounds, and when I was in a terrible mood, it had me listening to sharp, loud voices. My only option for treatment was to take medication to make the voices go away, or at least subside. That's exactly what I did. I was able to overcome my disease and more with the help of my parents. I wish I had notified them about what was going on with me right away so they could have helped me figure it out sooner. I don't care what other people think of me, and I don't care what they say about me. I don't care if I am our school's weirdo. I've already graduated and enrolled in college. I am no longer concerned about failing to meet the expectations of others. Whatever happens, it won't be worse than hearing voices in my head.